I saw the ongoing influence of Beijing's front organisations. It was called the APPRC, and its influence through political donations to both sides of politics. Remember, even before poor old Gladys was outed, far more influential people on both sides of politics were taking donations from Xiangmo, the person who ASIO has had excluded from Australia and not had his permanent visa renewed.
Because you've obviously got a lot of experience seeing this up close as an MP in the Labor Party, you know, what did you do to address it at the time? Did you often have conversations with other MPs, or did you raise it with Bill Shorten, who of course was opposition leader then?
Well, I was quite close to Bill Shorten when I was in Canberra, and we discussed it. There were tensions between people who in New South Wales wanted to raise money, and it's quite understandable for any political party if the rules were not as tight as they are now. And I was trying to convince him that this was being given for political purposes, for foreign policy purposes, and it had its effect. To his credit, Bill Shorten and the Labor Party put a ban on receiving donations from Xiangmo and related entities before federal parliament legislated on this. So remember, Shari, one of the reasons we're in a much stronger position now to deal with these foreign interference in Australia is we've passed the foreign interference legislation and the foreign donations legislation. This is all part of a big picture. So what's happened to Gladys in the last few days, the ICAC hearings about people being given bags of $100,000 in Aldi bags, the pressure on our South Pacific island nations to take up debts which they won't be able to service, and then Beijing ends up in control of some of their port assets or similar assets. All of this is part of a big picture that we haven't brought on. I just got to assure Australians we can have good trade with China. We can keep normal about this issue, not get too excited. But we have to understand that since Xi Jinping became an unlimited dictator in China, where he is no longer a two-term premier, as the previous Chinese premiers were, that country has become a lot more aggressive, and it's got nothing to do with us, but we have to be very concerned about it, both at a military strategic level and at a political interference level, and particularly with our close neighbours. I mean, the Australian government, Shari, even had to stump up the money to build a submarine cable from Honiara in the Solomons so that Huawei wouldn't buy it.
You mentioned before the foreign policy implications of some of these donations. Was there pressure on the Labor Party to have a different foreign policy platform when it comes to, you know, beyond not just the South China Sea, which of course we know about from Dastyari's press conference, but on other issues as well?
Look, there's a legitimate difference in both of the major political parties on the issue of China. So, for instance, Chris Bowen, who was then Treasury spokesman, argued that we should examine Belt and Road, that's the Chinese strategic economic plan for the world, or, as far as it involves Australia, on a case-by-case basis. That's a rational point of view. I'm very suspicious of the Belt and Road initiative, as are many people in federal Labor and in the government. Now,
you did try to give a speech in Parliament that was critical of ACRI, the Chinese-friendly think tank, and also critical of Xiangmo. What happened when you tried to give that speech in Parliament?
Well, in order to influence people, and because it was such an important speech, I circulated it to a few people, and a few people who were more on the pro-China side of the argument became a little panicked, and they sent it to the leader's office. You've got to remember, this is in a time before people understood who Xiangmo was, what the United Front Department was doing in Australia via its front organisations, some of which poor old Gladys has been the honorary president of.
Well, it was before the Sam Dastyari scandal broke, wasn't it?
It was before all of this, and so you know, they said, look, please don't give it, because you know, we've got big donations coming from these people, and we've got a lot of pressure from the New South Wales branch not to jeopardise their fundraising.
Now, just to be clear, I reported last week that you were actually summoned to Bill Shorten's office, and as you just said then, the speech reached the leader's office. So who actually told you not to give the speech?
Look, I told you, Shari, that the leader's office asked me not to. I don't reveal private conversations between me and individuals when it's at that level. I'm sorry. That they effectively got me to pull the speech. I regret it. I did many other things, though, to alert academics and
was it Bill Shorten? Did Bill Shorten ask you not to give the speech on behalf of pressure from New South Wales Labor?
I'm not going to confirm or deny that, Shari. I don't reveal private conversations about high political matters like that. I was parliamentary secretary to the leader. I had a loyalty to him, and everyone is in politics, you're torn sometimes between issues you feel very deeply about and loyalty to party and leaders. It's a very difficult issue, and I'm really pleased that as chairman of the Joint Foreign Affairs Committee and then subsequently as parliamentary secretary, I was able to play a key role in stopping the extradition treaty with China. Yes, Julie Bishop was going to have an extradition treaty with China like the one that all of the people in Hong Kong are protesting so hard against. We managed to block Huawei before all other countries in the world from bidding for the NBN and now the 5G. So Australia's been ahead of the game, leading the game. As The Economist said in its article called Sharp Power, we have a lot to take credit for here. And,
but Michael Danby, just before we move off this, you can confirm, though, that you were called to the leader's office where you were told not to give the speech because of, as you just said, because of donations. So it was Bill Shorten's office you were called to?
Yes. Yeah.
And it was explicitly made clear that that those comments could jeopardise donations that were coming from Xiangmo.
Might. Not explicitly. It was one of the issues, and you know, for the same reason that Penny Wong has recently asked senators not to go ahead with the public inquiry into improper influence by Beijing in Australia, that it will upset foreign relations with China. So, you know...
So one of the things you had planned to discuss in that speech was ACRI. What so concerned you about ACRI and the way it operated in Australia?
Well, Mr. Xiangmo was clearly a person identified 100% with Beijing's newly aggressive foreign policy, including its policy that is in violation of the international community's and the judgment of courts that there is free access to the South China Sea, and was making major donations to both sides of politics, both Liberal and Labor. In fact, James Campbell in the Herald Sun calculated in a very useful table that they did that appeared on the front page of the Herald Sun that more than $6.5 million had been given by these Beijing front organisations to Australian political parties. And I thought that was an improper and an unethical thing for both sides of politics to do, and that's why there was such non-partisan support for this foreign interference and foreign donations laws, which were passed at the very end of the last parliament. It's a great achievement. We've actually led the world on this. I wish our friends in New Zealand, I mean, if you think Gladys's broadcast is bad, Shari, you should see the leader of the New Zealand National Party, the alternative Prime Minister of New Zealand. The most
I just want to ask you about a couple of other things
speech I've ever seen.
Just lastly, Michael Danby, you did have a couple of clashes with Bob Carr when he was Foreign Minister, so you do have a long-running rivalry. What were those clashes about?
Well, one of them was obviously about the Middle East, where I really resented him having been made Foreign Minister by Prime Minister Julia Gillard, then behaving like Tiberius on the telephone. So that was one of the many issues. But I objected to his whole pro-Beijing and views in particular. And I just think that Stephen Conroy at the time, who was took a much more active role in saying that federal Labor supported the United States in dispute with China in the South China Sea, and I think that should have been our position much more clearly. To be fair, Bill Shorten strongly supported that. I really don't agree with Anthony Albanese, who's recently said that he's worried that there's an issue of xenophobia. I mean, the point is, Shari, is we haven't done this. Australia is not responsible. You, Sky News, the other journalists, Four Corners, we're not responsible. Beijing has decided to become much more aggressive. Xi Jinping is an unlimited dictator. He has militarised the South China Sea against all conventions of international law. He's leveraging countries in the South Pacific against Australia's interests, and he and his acolytes are politically interfering in internal Australian politics. And you can see it on one hand, New South Wales Labor at ICAC, and poor Gladys in the federal parliament on the Liberal Party side.